Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we are taking a look at Frawrst's Warbringer Ground Slam Serker in our 8th episode of our weekly featured series on various builds in Path of Exile. So for those of you who are new to the channel, you can of course like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about more video discussions just like this one. If you're a veteran of the channel, then of course you know if at any point in time you'd like to jump ahead or revisit any of our discussion points today, you can do so with the timestamps placed above my slightly balding forehead. Now, a couple of requirements are needed in order for a build to be featured in our weekly discussion videos. One of them is that a build is fun. Another of them is that it is easily readable. And Frawrst has done a great job putting together this particular guide for you and for me to enjoy in order to slam everything that Path of Exile has got for us to slam. We can stun everything in the game that is not unwavering or that just doesn't have ridiculous amounts of metamorph HP. But more on that in just a moment with the pros and cons of the build. First off, wanted to show off some gameplay. So of course you can go over to Frawrst's YouTube channel and you can ding his bell and subscribe and be notified for more videos. But take a look at just how amazing this is. This is a Minotaur that of course has got Unwavering, which gets stunned. This is Zoff, which doesn't have Unwavering, and you can actually see in the gameplay footage right here that Zoff, while you're hitting him, he's got this little floaty icon going above his head there. That little floaty icon that you can see above his head indicates that he is in fact stunned. So we'll get more into this in just a moment, but if you differentiate between monsters that have Unwavering, which means they cannot be stunned, versus monsters that don't have Unwavering, you will actually be able to notice a significant amount of boost in your ability to stun as much of the Atlas as you would like to with this particular build. The other thing that's nice about this build during Metamorph League, which is where we're at right now, is it's ridiculously cheap. So for those of you who are looking for all of the various required uniques for this particular build, don't worry, we'll get into them more in just a moment. But first off, here's the introduction on the overall purpose and direction of the build. So Frawrst is an intermediate to veteran PoE player, and he's been around since Incursion. Well, he's been around longer than that, but he's been making builds and showing things off since Incursion League. The Ground Slam Serker, in his own words, is, in my opinion, one of the more underused and beginner-friendly builds the game has to offer. It has linear scaling and is easy to understand gearing investments. Every upgrade feels meaningful. It uses two-handed maces, and although one-handed maces and one-handed or two-handed axes are also viable depending on your preference. The build is a resolute technique build that uses an emphasis on stunning as much as you can. This allows for greater safety and easier gear progression. Crit versions are viable, but of course, as with everything in Path of Exile, if you want to crit it, it's going to be more expensive. So check out the FAQ section on this particular guide for more details on that. Which, by the way, if you'd like any more resources for this build, like you'd like to go and check out this particular build guide for yourself, they're all included down below in the video description. So let's quickly take a look at the pros and cons of Frawrst's Ground Slam Serker that can stun pretty much everything in the game. First off, it's easy to league start with. I know we're a month into the league right now with Metamorph, but for those of you who have been playing various meta builds, hi, hello, like me, maybe you've been playing Essence Drain Contagion, maybe you've been playing a Saboteur, maybe you've been playing a minion build of some kind. If you're looking to transition and play something that is more of a melee feel to it, this will be easy to transition to if you don't have any gear saved up for presently. Also, if you'd like to try at this point in the league to swap over to something like an SSF build, like if you ever want to swap over and change leagues halfway through the league and earn more challenges in a different league, that's also an option for you to do. So this particular build is excellent when it comes to league starting. Next up, it's safe. The build has great innate defensive mechanics, including Fortify, as well as healing off of stun-locked enemies, and then, of course, the entire time that something is stun-locked, it's stun-locked. It can't do anything to you, right? So as long as you're not standing in some kind of ground degen, as long as the boss or whatever it is that you're hitting is stunned, it can't cast at you, which is a fantastic defensive layer. Many different builds in Path of Exile rely on offensive abilities as their actual additional layers of defensive abilities. Of course, one of the classic ones is freeze, right? If something is frozen, then it's not able to do anything to you. Well, the same thing can be applied and said for stun. When something is stunned, it can't cast at you, it can't attack at you, it can't move or maneuver around from you. It just stands there while you are repeatedly stunning it. Also, this build carries on it 6 endurance charges, which gives it a result of about 24% physical damage reduction and 24% all resist. So if you're looking for something to overcap your resistances in order to run maps like maps that have got, I don't know, elemental weakness on them, you can do that with this particular build, which is another perk for it as a league starter. Because so often as a league starter, what you want to aim for is a build that doesn't require you to re-roll a whole bunch of maps, because you don't necessarily have a whole bunch of maps built up in your pool yet when you're league starting. Of course, another bonus for this build is boss killing and mapping. So the build excels, yes, at single target damage, but there are ways to actually scale up the AoE on this particular build, making it very, very nice for running maps. Lastly, in the pros list, Frawrst mentions that linear gear progression makes it very, very easy for you to understand exactly where you need to be on your gear in order for upgrades to be achieved. That's really, really nice for newer players who are looking for something to progress their build going from point A to point B and knowing exactly how to scale their build. Many builds don't do that, and Frawrst does a great job of explaining exactly how to go about that. Now, it's not all roses and kisses and exalted drops. Okay, there are some cons to this build. First off, it cannot do physical reflect maps. Like, duh, right? This build has no way to mitigate reflect. So if something does roll fizz reflect, don't go in and lose your hardcore character, and don't rip your percentage of XP. Just re-roll the map or save it for later and do it on another character, of course. Hardcore viability. Frawrst openly admits he's a softcore player, so this build is made with that in mind for new players in softcore. He's not tested this build in hardcore, so don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying this is the end-all, be-all hardcore solution build for every single thing in the game in hardcore. Rather, this is a build that was built with softcore in mind, with newer players in mind, and with melee stun effect in mind. Lastly, as a con, it is a melee build, and although Ground Slam offers huge AoE and screen clear, it's not Tornado Shot, it's not Essence Drain, and it's not minion builds in terms of its speed. So it's a melee build that's going to require you to stand there and actually hit Ground Slam every once in a while as you're going from pack to pack. So if you don't like a melee build, this might not be for you. Conversely, if you're like a whole bunch of players in the Path of Exile community that are looking for melee builds and looking for them to be fun, like me, then this is a great build for you. Let's jump on from the pros and cons to the passive tree of this particular build. There is, of course, the Path of Building link that is provided down below in the video description. This is, of course, a Berserker tree. On this particular Berserker, there's a couple of nodes that you're going to want. You're going to want Warbringer, which gives you 25% life and mana when you use a Warcry, which is really, really nice. If you paid attention during the gameplay videos, or if you go back over and you watch more of Frawrst videos, you'll notice that he is often using his Warcry abilities, which are really, really nice. If you've used a Warcry recently, you and nearby allies have 20% increased attack speed, and then you've got 15% chance to deal double damage if you've Warcried in the past 8 seconds. That's really, really important in order to hit the thresholds that are required for us to stun lock HP, max HP bosses that the game has got to offer presently. You're also going to want to get Crave the Slaughter, which of course gains 1 rage on hit with attacks, no more than once every 0.3 seconds. And then, of course, Rite of Ruin, which gives us cannot be stunned while you have at least 25 rage. Don't worry about the rage part. You're going to have rage pretty much the entire time as long as you've hit something. The only time that you're not going to have this particular ability active for your character is when you start an instance or when you start a zone, because you won't have the rage saved up from the previous zone. Other than that, lose 0.1% of life per second per rage while you are not losing rage, and then inherent effects from having rage are tripled, which is quite nice. And then on top of that, lastly, you'll want Aspect of Carnage, which is just 10% increased damage taken and 40% more damage. This is the Abyssus helmet essentially built into a passive on the tree. Outside of the Ascendancy, if we're looking at the total tree, of course you're going to want to come over and grab some life near the Constitution and Scion life wheel. There are going to be several different key jewel nodes that you are going to want to grab. One that's here in between the Marauder and Duelist tree, coming all the way down to the very bottom of the Marauder and Duelist tree. Also near the Endurance charge that is inside the Marauder tree. And then you are going to come up and grab the jewel slot that is near the Templar and Marauder tree. Now, of course, Resolute Technique is very, very important for this build because we're not scaling it with crits, at least with this particular version. You can if you'd like to, but this setup isn't built to do that. So if you're scaling with Resolute Technique, you're going to want to get this rather early. If you're leveling with this build right now as you're watching this video, I would highly, highly recommend that you make a beeline for Resolute Technique. You can get it relatively early, and then from Resolute Technique, you can actually go over and fill in the rest of your life wheel. This should give you some physical damage consistency because you're constantly hitting thanks to Resolute Technique, and it also gives you some defensive reliability because you've got a lot of HP thanks to grabbing some of that Scion life wheel as you're leveling up. Early game, you should be able to progress quite nicely once you've gotten Resolute Technique. It fixes all of your accuracy issues the instant that you get it. So I'd recommend that you grab that as soon as possible. Another attractive part of this particular build, I am in love with this passive node. Soul of Steel gives you so much value. It gives you 1% to all maximum elemental resistances, 5% additional physical mitigation, and then it gives you 30% increased armor, and then it gives you flat armor. I know that back in the day, we've all complained about armor and its efficiency, but the reality is right now in Path of Exile, with so many different sources of damage, actually getting their abilities off because they've got a ton of HP, with the 3.9 update, it means that having more and more armor or more different layers of ways of dealing with physical damage is a good thing, is a bonus. And so grabbing Soul of Steel is another great way to mitigate incoming damage, and the fact that it gives you +1 to all maximum elemental resistances is like a massive bonus on top of that. Like, I would probably go for Soul of Steel if I was playing this tree, even if it didn't have that maximum elemental resistances, but the fact that it's got that on there, it's fantastic for damage reduction. Now, other key points to note on this particular build. You're going to grab some life as you come down and grab Bloodless, which also means that enemies cannot leech life from you. And you're going to grab Stun Mastery. Stun Mastery is incredibly important because it gives you reduced enemy stun threshold. The way how stun threshold works is there are certain amounts of damage that you need to do to an enemy in order for it to actually qualify to be stunned. So, if you're not doing enough damage to hit that stun threshold, then you won't actually stun the enemy. So what Stun Mastery does is it essentially makes it easier for your damage to actually stun an enemy. So it makes it a little bit nicer because you don't have to scale your damage up quite so much because you're scaling your enemy stun threshold. Speaking of enemy stun threshold, man, say that 10 times fast. Did I mention that this is a Tidebreaker build? The Tidebreaker Imperial Maul reads like this. Socketed gems are supported by level 20 endurance charge on melee stun. So there's some of your endurance charge generation. Also, it just gives a bunch of flat physical damage for a total of about 400 or so-ish DPS, depending on the rolls that you're getting on your particular version of the weapon. On top of that, it gives 10% increased physical damage per endurance charge, which, of course, we're grabbing 6 endurance charges on this particular build, and it gives you reduced enemy stun threshold with this weapon. So, combining this with our passive tree and getting Stun Mastery, along with using Tidebreaker, we are essentially making it easier for ourselves to hit those stun thresholds that are required to actually stun big bosses that the game has got to offer. For your helmet, you're just basically looking for resistances as well as armor. And of course, because this is a melee build and because it's a ground slam build, these are relatively cheap when compared with other versions of Lab Enchants for more meta builds. So right now, if you can go out and grab a 40% increased ground slam damage helmet, now is probably going to be the chance for you to do that at its cheapest. This build, because it uses a two-hander, that's where your 6-link weapon is going to go. It means that it can use a Comb's Heart, which is very, very nice for your defensive layers and for stacking up your HP, which, did I mention, this build has got 7,900 HP on it as constructed in POB. That's pretty good. On top of that, you're using gloves that are the unique steel skill gauntlets called Tomb Fist. This, of course, is going to have an abyssal socket in it, which when socketed, you have the option to either maim enemies when you're using a searching eye jewel or use a murderous eye jewel to intimidate enemies. And then, of course, on top of that, it's got increased maximum life. If you're playing in standard, you can get a legacy version of these, which I think I've got a couple of them. They're pretty nice. They also give you increased attack speed. On top of that, your boots are going to be the Red Blade Tramplers. These give you +1 to maximum endurance charges if you're lucky enough to get the corruption on it. It's a ridiculously hard thing to hit. Other than that, it actually adds some physical damage to attacks, which of course we're trying to stack as much of that as we can, and it gives you reduced enemy stun threshold. Are you picking up on a theme here? The more chances that we've got to reduce an enemy's stun threshold, the easier it is for our total build to function while we are stunning bosses throughout the entirety of the game. On top of that, we've got an amulet here that gives you just a bunch of attributes to meet various gear ring requirements, along with, of course, good elemental resistances, and then some flat life. In our rings, what we're looking for is elemental resistances as well as life. And then in our belt slot, we're using Risloth. Oh my goodness, I can't say this name. Somebody down in the comments, teach me how to say this name. Rislotha's Coil. Okay, I tried. I did my best. All right, so there's 40% more maximum physical attack damage and 34% less minimum physical attack damage. It also adds 1 to 17 physical flat damage to attacks, and then it also gives you life. Then, whenever you stun an enemy, you just gain straight up 50 life, right? Now, you might be saying that's not that big of a deal, right, to be gaining life, but when you consider that you've got rage going on, and potentially when you enter into a new zone, you might not have your rage meter up very high, but it's high enough that you're not like leeching back a whole ton of life or getting a whole bunch of life back while you're smacking. It's really, really nice that as soon as you go into a new room with new enemies and your rage is starting to build and you're starting to get some degen, that as soon as you start stunning things, you're getting flat life back. Take note that this just says gain 50 life, right? So this doesn't say that you're regenerating 50 life, which means if you're running a no regen map, you will still get this effect back. For our flasks, we're of course going to use the classic Lion's Roar, because why not? It gives us up to 25% more melee physical damage during the effect. When you're watching the videos of Frawrst's various gameplay, you will notice that he quite often pops Lion's Roar because it is such a big multiplier. And then, oh yeah, it doesn't hurt because it's a granite flask. It also gives you a whole bunch of armor. In our Watcher's Eye slot, it seems like every single build nowadays is using a Watcher's Eye. This particular Watcher's Eye is going to grant you 4% increased life and mana, and of course energy shield. Yeah, we know that. That's the Watcher's Eye. The particular stats that we're looking for on this Watcher's Eye is 12% chance to deal double damage while using Pride. This is going to be one of the pricier things that you can buy, so save up for it, right? Don't look at this Watcher's Eye and then make a decision on whether or not you're going to play the build. You can play this build fine without this particular Watcher's Eye. That being said, if you've got the currency to throw out a build, you really want to stun everything, you can throw this Watcher's Eye into the build and just watch as everything just gets that little stun birdies around the effect. Like it's Bugs Bunny all of a sudden. Like Shaper's just looking around and he's seeing Bugs Bunny. Anyway, lastly, you're going for Rapid Expansion, which of course also gives you 12% increased global physical damage. And then with at least 40 strength in radius, Ground Slam has a 35% chance to grant an endurance charge when you stun an enemy. With at least 40 strength in radius, Ground Slam also has 50% increased angle. What this does is this essentially increases the area of effect, but it's not AoE, it's the area of effect that Ground Slam actually hits, right? So that percentage of increased angle is quite nice for actually widening the breadth of things that you can hit with a single cast or a single attack of Ground Slam. One thing to note here, if you're a newer player, this is what's known as a threshold jewel, which threshold jewels are worded very, very particularly. This one says with at least 40 strength in radius. So please note, you don't have to have this actually allocated. It just says in radius. So you can choose any of the particular jewel slots that will actually have the strength options for you on the tree, but are not selected. So for instance, if you're using it in this particular selection, the radius will actually cover this strength node and this strength node, both of which will count towards the 40 strength in radius. So just wanted to make that very, very clear, painfully clear for new players. Our 6-link setup is this: Vol Ground Slam with Concentrated Effect, Ruthless, Melee Physical Damage, Pulverize, and Brutality. Other than that, supporting our build, we've got Pride, we've got Blood and Sand, and then we've got Flesh and Stone with an Enlightened support. And then on our Leap Slam ability, we've got Leap Slam with faster attacks and Enduring Cry. In our Blood Rage socket, we've got Blood Rage, Enfeeble, Immortal Call, and Cast when damage taken. You can also, if you really want to go crazy, you could set this up with Vulnerability. But the way how Frawrst has it set up is for Vulnerability actually to be applied via the Tomb Fist corrupted gloves that he's got, which apply Vulnerability on hit, which is really, really nice. Again, another top-end thing. You don't have to worry about that if you're league starting with this particular build, or if you're just looking to try it out. You could self-cast Vulnerability if you really need to, in order to make sure that whatever it is that you are targeting gets stun-locked. Well, that's Frawrst's build. Hopefully you enjoy and try this particular build out. Maybe you've never played a melee build. Maybe you've heard from all of your friends about playing minions and playing bow characters and playing trappers. Maybe you've actually never gotten to play something where you just pick up a two-handed mace and just start smashing the crap out of everything in Path of Exile. If you'd like to do that, then I highly recommend Frawrst's Ground Slam Berserker, and I hope that today is the day, while you're slamming away and stunning the Atlas, a Mirror of Calandra drops for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.